The set of the Kelly Clarkson Show was buzzing with excitement as Teddy Swims took his seat beside Kelly, ready to talk about his explosive rise in the music world. Known for his soulful voice and tattooed, vulnerable aesthetic, Teddy had become a fan favorite for bridging raw emotion with genre-defying style. At first, the conversation was smooth and filled with lighthearted banter talk of Atlanta roots, childhood inspirations, and his viral success. But things took a sharp turn when Kelly asked a pointed question about whether his rapid fame had outpaced his artistry, implying that virality might be masking a lack of depth. The room shifted. Teddy, taken aback, but composed, responded, "I didn't get here because of algorithms. I got here because I bleed on every record." Kelly attempted to clarify, suggesting that some critics had wondered if the emotion in his songs was more performance than truth. That was the breaking point. "I sing about pain because I lived it," Teddy said, his voice suddenly sharper. "If you want to talk about gimmicks, find someone who's pretending." He stood up calmly, removed his mic, and looked Kelly in the eye. "I'm not here to prove my heart to anyone," he said, then walked off stage, leaving a moment of silence that echoed louder than any closing applause. The moment immediately exploded online. Clips of Teddy's exit flooded Twitter and TikTok, sparking a firestorm of opinions. Fans rushed to defend him, calling out the perceived disrespect and applauding him for standing his ground. Commentators weighed in on everything from the line. Between tough questions and passive-aggressive jabs to the treatment of emotionally vulnerable men in media, Kelly Clarkson released a short statement the following day, saying, "It was never my intention to question Teddy's integrity as an artist. Emotions ran high, and I respect his decision. But Teddy stayed silent. No follow-up tweets, no interviews, no damage control. Instead, he dropped a surprise acoustic track on YouTube the following weekend. A stripped-down, a filtered ballad that felt more like a statement than any press release ever could. Fans quickly connected it to the walk-off, with one top comment reading, "You didn't have to say a word. We felt it all here." The song skyrocketed in views. It became clear that Teddy Swims hadn't just walked out of a talk show segment. He had walked into the next chapter of his artistry, one where his music would speak even louder than his presence on any stage. In the weeks that followed. Teddy Swims' decision to walk off the Kelly Clarkson Show transformed from a moment of tension into a cultural touchstone. Discussions spread across music forums, podcasts, and news outlets, with many zeroing in on how artists, especially those who present as emotionally raw and authentic, are often challenged in ways that feel less like curiosity and more like skepticism. Teddy's silence only deepened the impact. Without a single interview or public statement, he let his art carry the weight of his response. His acoustic track, now dubbed Exit Wounds by fans, despite having no official title, became an anthem for creators who refused to be boxed in or questioned for expressing vulnerability. Meanwhile, Kelly continued her show with grace, subtly shifting the tone of future interviews, more empathy, less edge. Behind the scenes, insiders said the producers had been caught off guard by how fast the exchange escalated, but privately acknowledged that Teddy had handled the situation with painful elegance. As the music world embraced his quiet defiance, one message became unmistakable. Teddy Swims didn't walk off in anger. He walked away from a moment that tried to shrink his truth. And in doing so, he reminded the world that artistry isn't something you defend, something you live. As the media storm began to settle, the impact of Teddy Swims' quiet exit lingered far longer than anyone expected. Artists from across genres began sharing their own stories of being misunderstood, misrepresented, or reduced by interviews that prioritized provocation over understanding. Teddy, intentionally or not, had tapped into something bigger than himself, a generational exhaustion with performance off stage. Fans praised him not just for walking away, but for doing so without spectacle. There were no slammed doors, no shouting, just a calm removal of the mic and a decision to disengage. That restraint spoke volumes. In the meantime, his music continued to climb charts, now colored by the deeper emotional context of what had transpired. A previously released track, Lose Control, re-entered streaming playlists with a vengeance, as if audiences were revisiting his work through a more empathetic lens. Music critics began penning think pieces about vulnerability in male artists and how Teddy's moment marked a rare refusal to bend under pressure. He hadn't stormed off in a fit of ego. He'd stood up for himself in a way that was measured, human, and deeply personal. And in a media landscape that often rewards chaos, Teddy Swims reminded everyone that dignity can still make the loudest noise. Asterisk, as conversations around the incident evolved, Teddy Swims' walk-off began to symbolize something deeply personal. For many, the right to protect your peace, even in the face of a massive audience. Mental health advocates and artists alike started referencing the moment as a case study in setting emotional boundaries under public pressure. For a performer whose brand was rooted in authenticity, the walk-off wasn't a rejection of criticism, it was a rejection of doubt disguised as curiosity. Music festivals and late-night shows that followed welcomed Teddy with open arms deliberately, framing interviews around inspiration rather than interrogation. In every performance that came after, there was a new edge to his delivery, not bitter, but grounded, like someone who knew exactly what he stood for. And while Teddy never returned to the Kelly Clarkson Show, nor spoke ill of Kelly herself, his silence remained powerful. He continued building his community the way he always had, through music, truth, and an unshakable sense of self. What some saw as a moment of tension, others saw as a quiet revolution. And when fans screamed the lyrics to his newest single at sold-out shows, it was clear they weren't just singing his words. They were echoing his stand. Asterisk, months later, the conversation about Teddy Swims' silent departure hadn't faded, it had matured. What once lived in headlines now lingered in classrooms, podcasts, and writing rooms where creatives dissected the deeper meaning behind his decision. Industry professionals praised his grace, calling it a masterclass in emotional clarity. Under pressure, fans continued to elevate him, not just as a vocalist with a rare gift, but as a man who refused to be emotionally dissected for entertainment. His concerts became spaces of catharsis, each performance infused with the energy of someone who had turned a moment of scrutiny into a movement of self-trust. Merchandise lines began carrying the phrase, "I don't perform pain," a slogan that became synonymous with his stance on artistic boundaries. Meanwhile, Kelly Clarkson moved forward with humility, using her platform to foster more mindful conversations, even referencing the moment with Teddy indirectly in an episode about emotional safety in interviews, though they hadn't spoken publicly since there was no bad blood, only a clear, unspoken understanding. Teddy Swims hadn't stormed off because he was angry. He walked away because he knew he had already said everything worth saying in his music. And with each new release, the message became louder. Real emotion doesn't need defending, it needs protecting. Asterisk, by the year's end, the ripple effect of Teddy Swims' quiet walk-off had woven itself into the fabric of pop culture, not just as a singular media moment, but as a watershed for how emotional honesty is valued in the entertainment industry. His name became synonymous with more than just vocal talent. TID stood for integrity. Documentaries and artist panels referenced the incident as a shift in the power dynamic between interviewer and guest, where authenticity could no longer be mined carelessly without consequence. Teddy, for his part, never leaned into the controversy. He let the silence surrounding that moment remain intact, never exploiting it for attention or relevance. His work spoke louder, albums layered with soul, struggle. In triumph, he'd sung a page from the same diary he'd once protected with a quiet exit. Fans who had followed him since the beginning now saw him not just as a singer, but as a compass for creative self-respect. He wasn't anti-media, he was pro-boundary. And in an era of viral meltdowns and sensationalist soundbites, that choice resonated more deeply than any televised apology ever could. Teddy Swims hadn't just walked off a stage, he had walked into a legacy defined not by a moment of conflict, but by his unwavering commitment to truth on his own terms. Asterisk.